The Florida sun was a relentless bully, beating down on Mark's thinning hair as he wrestled with a particularly stubborn weed. He was sweating, not the dainty kind, but the kind that made his t-shirt cling to him like a second, damp skin. "Damn dandelions," he grumbled, his voice a low rumble that barely escaped the confines of his small, suburban backyard. It wasn't a pretty backyard, by any means. Overgrown grass, a few sad-looking tomato plants that had seen better days, and a collection of slightly deranged-looking lawn gnomes guarding absolutely nothing of value. Mark, a former software engineer who traded lines of code for lines of unruly foliage, wasn't exactly winning at that suburban paradise game. He'd always been more comfortable with the predictable logic of algorithms than the unpredictable chaos of nature, or worse, the chaotic whims of other people. He wiped his brow with the back of his hand, leaving a streak of dirt on his forehead. "Maybe I should just pave the whole thing," he muttered, staring at the patch of weeds with the kind of resentment usually reserved for telemarketers and autocorrect. Just as he was contemplating the merits of a concrete jungle, the air began to shimmer. Not in the heat haze kind of way, but more like a poorly rendered visual effect. Mark blinked, squinted, and rubbed his eyes, half expecting to find a rogue bottle of scotch hidden in the tomato patch. A low hum vibrated through the ground, making his tools rattle against the patio stones. The weeds in front of him suddenly flattened themselves and the air thrummed with an increasing intensity. Mark braced himself, his heart suddenly hammering against his ribs. "Okay, this is either a really bad acid flashback or something else entirely," he muttered to himself. Then, from the shimmering distortion above, something descended. It wasn't a crash, not exactly. It was more like a gentle settling. Like a giant, glowing metallic egg had decided to have a nap in his backyard. The egg, a sleek, silver pod of some sort, sat silently in the middle of his lawn, the shimmering air around it slowly dissipating. Mark stared, mouth agape, his cynical mind momentarily at a loss for sarcasm. This wasn't in the manual. Not the gardening manual, nor the how to handle existential crises while you're over 40 one that he probably should have written. Then, a section of the pod's surface slid open with a soft hiss, revealing an interior that pulsed with a soft blue light. A figure emerged. It was tall, at least 7 feet, lean, and moved with an almost unsettling grace. Its skin shimmered, shifting between emerald and sapphire hues. It had large, almond-shaped silver eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. It was, to put it mildly, not from around here. "Holy garden gnomes," Mark finally managed to stammer, his voice a mixture of awe and disbelief. His brain, still stuck in gardening mode, noted with surprising clarity that the alien was standing on his prize-winning patch of petunias. You're not a new neighbor, are you?" he blurted out, the absurdity of the question hitting him even as the words left his mouth. The being tilted its head slightly, a delicate ridge on its head glowing brighter. It emitted a series of soft clicks and whistles that were followed by a sound that resembled a broken radio trying to find a station. Then, a voice, clear and strangely devoid of emotion, entered Mark's mind. It was a voice that wasn't a voice, more like thoughts being carefully inserted into his head. "Greetings, Earthling. I am Xylar." The voice sounded confused and slightly off, almost as if it was trying to speak English with a manual. Mark's eyes widened, his mind scrambling to process the telepathic greeting. "Okay, so, telepathy. Got it," he said aloud, his voice sounding ridiculously casual for the circumstances. "An Xylar? Like XYLAR? That's as unique. So, you just parked your egg in my yard?" he asked, gesturing to the craft with a trowel. "My vessel experienced unforeseen navigational difficulties," Xylar replied, their thoughts still sounding slightly stilted. "I detected a suitable landing site. This backyard seemed appropriate. Am I disturbing your soil?" Mark snorted, a laugh escaping him. "Disturbing my soil? You just landed a frigging spaceship on top of it. And my prize-winning petunias. That's beyond disturbing. That's like a crime against horticulture." He started waving the trowel around in a surprisingly aggressive manner, Do you even have the permit for that thing? And what do you mean, navigational difficulties? Like, did you take a wrong turn at Alpha Centauri? Xylar tilted their head again, the bioluminescent patches on their chest pulsing slightly. Permit? Alpha Centauri? These E-concepts are not within my datasets, their thoughts projected into Mark's head, clearly puzzled. My purpose is to engage with the dominant species. I have designated you as the dominant species. Me? Dominant? Oh boy. I'm the dominant species? You've got to be kidding me. You're gonna be so disappointed. I can barely keep my tomato plants alive, and I can't even get my cat to come when I call him. Dominant species, yeah, right. More like dominantly disorganized. Mark muttered, shaking his head. He then sighed. Okay, Xylar, so you crash-landed in my garden, and you're... I don't even know how to call you. An alien? The term is acceptable, Xylar responded, their thoughts sounding somewhat less stilted this time. I have been monitoring Earth transmissions for several of your planetary rotations. I have learned some of your colloquialisms. Such as groovy. Mark blinked, staring at the alien. Groovy? Really? That's what you picked up? From which broadcast? A 1970s rerun. Are you gonna start talking about shag carpets next? He laughed again, a genuine chuckle escaping him. He ran a hand through his hair, which was now covered with mud and bits of leaves. Okay, this is officially the weirdest Tuesday of my life. So, Xylar, what exactly do you need from me? Do you need directions? Or maybe a AAA membership for your spaceship? Xylar was silent for a moment, then projected a new thought. I require a specific type of soil to replenish my energy through dermal absorption, they stated, their voice now slightly less robotic. Mark's eyebrows shot up. Dermal absorption? You mean you eat soil with your feet? He asked, genuinely surprised. He looked at the alien's three-toed feet, suddenly noticing the intricate details he hadn't noticed before. Okay, not my strangest Tuesday, but this is definitely top 3. And what kind of soil are we talking about? Like, organic, non-GMO, locally sourced dirt? Or space dirt? The composition is specific. High in silicate and traces of bioluminescent fungi, Xylar replied, a soft blue glow emanating from its chest, pulsating gently. I believe your current soil is inadequate. Mark looked down at his pathetic patch of Florida soil, then back at the glowing alien. He sighed. This was going to be a long, weird, and potentially very expensive process. He was starting to think that maybe paving the yard wasn't such a bad idea after all. He then noticed that the air smelled different, an almost lavender-like scent, that was calming. Okay, dermal absorption alien. Well, let's try to figure out how to get you some space dirt. Maybe I have some of that stuff somewhere. He then paused and chuckled. I really can't believe that this is happening. He then felt the calming sensation of Xylar's pheromones, making him feel more at peace with the fact that his life has become a low-budget sci-fi B-movie. Well, this is going to be a hell of a story to tell the neighbors. He didn't expect that to be true that fast. And so began Mark's adventure into the absurd, with a crashed alien, the need for strange soil, and a growing feeling that his life had just taken a hard left turn into the twilight zone. The next morning dawned with an unwelcome clarity. The Florida sun, having apparently recovered from its existential crisis, was back to its usual oppressive self. Mark, however, was not. He'd spent most of the night tossing and turning, replaying the events of the previous day in his mind. A crashed alien, telepathic communication, feet-eating soil, it all sounded like a fever dream, yet there was that silver pod sitting in his backyard, a gleaming, metallic reminder of the weirdness that had become his new normal. He stumbled out of bed, his joints protesting with the same enthusiasm as a disgruntled teenager. He peeked through his bedroom window. Xylar was still there, standing motionless in the middle of his pathetic excuse for a lawn, their iridescent skin catching the sunlight like a bizarre, living prism. Mark sighed, pulling on a pair of sweatpants that had seen better decades and a stained t-shirt that probably had more personality than he did. He shuffled downstairs, the scent of stale coffee filling the air, a familiar comfort in this new reality. After a quick breakfast of lukewarm coffee and a stale granola bar, Mark ventured into the backyard. Xylar turned its head, their silver eyes focusing on him. "Greetings, Mark. Did your organic biological machine successfully recover from its rest cycle?" Xylar's thoughts, though still somewhat stilted, were starting to sound less like a malfunctioning robot and more like a confused tourist. Mark chuckled, suppressing a yawn. "Yeah, something like that. Organic biological machine, huh? You mean my body? Or are you referring to my brain, which clearly needs a hard reset?" He picked up a rake, feeling a strange mix of annoyance and reluctant amusement. "So, about that soil, you said something about silicate and bioluminescent fungi? Where on earth am I supposed to find that? My analysis indicates that such soil is not commonly available on this planet. Perhaps your local gardening emporiums may possess similar substances," Xylar replied, their thoughts projecting a mental image of what Mark assumed was a very specific type of soil that looked like something that should be stored in a nuclear reactor. "Gardening emporium? Right. Because I'm sure the guys at Green Thumb Gardens down the road are stocking up on space dirt." "This is going to be fun," Mark muttered, deciding to go for the ironic approach. He grabbed his keys and a baseball cap, determined to tackle this bizarre mission. "Okay, Xylar, you stay here, try not to glow too brightly, and definitely do not eat any more petunias. I'll go see if I can find you some weird alien soil." The drive to the nearest gardening store was a mix of dread and morbid curiosity. He mentally went through his options, asking the staff for space soil was going to get him either laughed out of the building or possibly committed, and trying to explain that he needed something high in silicate and with glowing fungi was probably going to end the same way. He pulled into the parking lot of Green Thumb Gardens, a place that usually filled him with mild disgust. He hated the overly cheerful staff, the aggressively pastel-colored pots, and the suspiciously perfect-looking plants. Today, however, he had a feeling that even this place would feel less absurd than his backyard. He took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and marched inside, a man on a very strange mission. The store was, as usual, a pastel-colored assault on the senses. A woman with a smile that looked surgically attached approached him with an unnervingly chipper "Can I help you, sir?" Mark felt a pang of longing for the days when his biggest problem was a bug in his code. "Yeah," he said, his voice sounding a little too gruff, "I need some very specific soil. Something high in silicate, and with bioluminescent fungi." He cringed internally, waiting for the laughter or the concerned look. The woman's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Silicate and bioluminescent fungi? I'm not sure we carry anything like that, sir. Perhaps you're looking for fertilizer?" She blinked at him, and Mark was starting to suspect that she thought that he had escaped from a mental ward. No, not fertilizer," Mark insisted, trying to keep his tone even. "I need very specific ingredients. It's for a very special project," he finished, lamely. The woman looked at him with suspicion. "Well, we do have some glow-in-the-dark garden decorations if that helps," she said, gesturing to the display of brightly colored, mostly hideous plastic gnomes. Mark was about to ask her if they had any glowing alien feet-friendly soil when a man, sporting a ridiculously large hat and a bright green apron, approached them. "Trouble, Martha?" the man asked, his voice booming. He fixed Mark with a piercing stare. "You look like you're in need of some serious gardening advice." "He's looking for something different, Bob," Martha replied, her smile returning with a suspiciously forced enthusiasm. "Something with bioluminescent fungi, apparently." Bob, however, didn't bat an eye. He scratched his chin, his eyes twinkling. Bioluminescent fungi, you say? Now that's a new one. We usually just sell earthworms here, he said, then looked at Mark with a strange look. Say, friend, is that the guy who stole that dirt yesterday? Mark blinked. Stole dirt? What? Yeah, there was a report yesterday about some guy stealing a bunch of dirt from some construction sites. It was a weird one. The report said that the guy was muttering something about bioluminescent fungi, an alien feat, Bob said, his eye scanning Mark from head to toe. Mark's blood went cold. He'd completely forgotten about needing to find the soil. He'd spent the night researching Argonian biology with no luck, and had simply completely forgotten that he was in need of some dirt. He'd gone to a construction site the day before, and filled up a garbage bag with soil, muttering to himself about fungi and alien feet. That wasn't me, he said, trying to sound as calm and as innocent as he could. I mean, I'm not a dirt stealer, I'm a concerned gardener. Bob and Martha exchanged an amused look. Well, whatever floats your boat, buddy. We don't have that kind of soil, but we do have a very nice selection of peat moss, and an amazing line of soil enhancers. Interested? Martha said with a false smile. Mark sighed. He was clearly getting nowhere. Yeah, I'm not seeing anything I need, he said, backing away towards the door. I'll just go back to our special project. Thanks. He hurried out of the store, the feeling of being watched lingering on him. He decided to go to a different store, far away from the accusatory eyes of Green Thumb Gardens. The next two gardening stores ended in a similar way, with a combination of laughter, suspicion, and even a few concerned looks. After his third failed attempt, Mark was starting to consider going to a hardware store and trying to put something together when he remembered something. His grandfather, an avid gardener and amateur geologist, used to talk about the mineral content of soil. And he had a collection of samples somewhere in the attic. Maybe, just maybe, he would find what he needed there. He drove back home, his mind buzzing with the possibilities. Zyla was still there, in the middle of the yard. Mark greeted him with a sigh of relief. No space dirt at the gardening stores, Zyla. But I think I have an idea, he said. He then rushed into the house and went straight to the attic. After half an hour of frantic searching through dusty boxes, he found it, a collection of soil samples that had been carefully labeled with mineral composition. There, among the samples, he saw one bag labeled silicate-rich soil, northern Florida, with a small plastic bag of glowing fungi pinned to it. Bingo, he said to himself. He rushed downstairs, a victorious grin on his face, the bag of soil and fungi in hand. Zyla was standing in the middle of the yard, their bioluminescence pulsating with a soft glow. He dumped the contents of the bag near Zyla's feet. Zyla leaned down, their three-fingered hand reaching towards the soil. This matches the required specifications. Thank you, Mark, their thoughts projected. Mark smiled. You're welcome. So, dermal absorption, right? What should I expect? He asked, half amused, half intrigued. Zyla then stepped into the soil, and its body shivered, the bioluminescence on their body growing brighter. A soft humming filled the air. The air around them smelled strongly of lavender. Then, Zyla released a small puff of lavender-scented pheromones. Mark took a deep breath, feeling a strange mix of calmness and a surprising tingle in his lower stomach. He felt light, at peace, and strangely aroused. This was not good. Not at all. He backed away slightly, his eyes widening. Okay, so, pheromones. I guess I should have expected that. So, does it work? Are you charging? He asked, trying to keep his tone light, even though his body was telling him something else. Zyla was silent for a moment. I am absorbing energy. Your biological machine is reacting to my pheromonal emissions, they projected, their thoughts sounding amused. Are you experiencing any discomfort? Mark cleared his throat. Discomfort? No. no discomfort. I'm just gonna go inside and do some gardening indoors, he mumbled, his face feeling flushed. He turned to go inside and then accidentally tripped over a gnome. As he hit the ground, the calming pheromones washed over him, his body felt like jelly. He looked up, and the glowing alien looked at him with what looked like concern. Are you experiencing any discomfort now? They asked, and then lowered its head, coming closer to him. Their face was close to his, and the scent of lavender was making him feel lightheaded and aroused. Mark felt his heart rate quicken, and his hand started to shake. This was going to be a very long day, indeed. Mark bolted upright, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He was sprawled on the patio, a particularly hideous gnome leering at him from an unnervingly close distance. The lingering scent of lavender still hung heavy in the air, a fragrant reminder of the strange encounter he'd just had. He scrambled to his feet, feeling a mixture of embarrassment and an unexpected jolt of something akin to, well, attraction. Okay, pheromones, he muttered to himself, dusting off his sweatpants. Note to self, do not inhale alien pheromones directly. Or trip over garden gnomes. Preferably both. He glanced over at Xylar, who was standing perfectly still, their bioluminescent patterns pulsing steadily. They were now emanating a soft, almost hypnotic glow, their skin shifting more rapidly through shades of emerald and sapphire. Are your biological functions operating optimally? Xylar's thoughts projected into Mark's mind, sounding genuinely concerned. Mark rubbed the back of his neck, trying to regain his composure. Yeah, I'm fine. Just tripped. You know, human things. He cleared his throat, trying to steer the conversation away from the fact that he'd just had a rather disconcerting hormonal reaction to an alien. So, about the energy absorption, how's that going? The process is satisfactory. However, my biological processes are entering a new phase, Xylar responded, their mental voice sounding slightly more fragmented, almost like they were having trouble concentrating. Mark frowned. New phase? What kind of new phase? Is this like puberty? Because, honestly, I'm not sure I can handle alien puberty on top of everything else. He wasn't even sure if Argonians had puberty, but it was the only human equivalent that he could think of. My cellular structure is preparing for the reproduction process. It is a complex biological event known as budding, Xylar projected, their bioluminescent chest now glowing with an almost frantic intensity. Mark's eyebrows shot up. Budding? You mean like a plant? You're going to, I don't know, sprout another alien or something? He suddenly felt a strange sense of panic. This wasn't in the How to Deal with Aliens Crashing in Your Backyard handbook. If there was one, that was. The process involves cellular division. I will generate the new, autonomous entity genetically identical to myself, Xylar explained, their thoughts almost vibrating with energy. It is not the same as your mating processes. Okay, so not like a plant, more like a self-replicating alien printer, Mark muttered, his mind trying to grasp the concept of an alien literally splitting into two. He then paused and took a deep breath. So, you're going to split yourself? Right here, in my backyard? And how long does that take? He gestured to the yard around them. Are we talking a few minutes? Hours? Days? Because I need to make sure I have enough time to hide that from the neighbors. The duration is not precisely determined. It is influenced by numerous factors, including the intensity of my bioluminescence and the presence of suitable soil and a calm environment, Xylar responded, their thoughts laced with a sense of urgency. Mark rubbed his temples. Calm environment? You're telling me, when I have to hide from my neighbors the fact that there's an alien about to split in half? He then took a deep breath. Okay, calm is an option I do not have. Just try not to. I don't know, glow so much? And maybe keep the splitting to a minimum until I can figure out what to do. He looked at Xylar, now clearly stressed out, and felt a pang of sympathy. The poor alien must be feeling as confused as he was. All right, let's just try to deal with this one step at the time. As if on cue, Mrs. Henderson, Mark's overly next-door neighbor, started peering over the fence. Mark, dear. Is everything all right? I heard some strange noises this morning. And is that some sort of disco ball in your backyard? She squinted, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. Mark's eyes widened. He cursed under his breath. Hi, Mrs. Henderson. Yes, everything's fine. Just testing out some new garden decorations. You know, the new, futuristic kind. Yes, that's it. Futuristic garden decorations. He gave her a strained smile, trying to look as casual as possible. Futuristic garden decorations? Mrs. Henderson replied, her eyebrows rising. Well, they certainly are bright. Are you trying to attract aliens, dear? She giggled, clearly thinking that she was making a clever joke. Mark choked back a laugh. Yeah, something like that. Well, gotta go, Mrs. Henderson. The decorations need some tweaking. He waved, feeling sweat prickling his skin. He then turned to Xylar with a look of horror. The human is observing our interactions, Xylar projected, their thoughts laced with a strange sense of panic. Should I conceal of my bioluminescence? Yes. Definitely conceal your bioluminescence. Mark hissed, his voice barely a whisper. And try to look less alien. Why? Can you? I don't know, put on a hat or something. He then winced, realizing how absurd his suggestion was. Xylar tilted their head, looking more confused than ever. A hat? It is a human head covering. How does it aid in the concealment of bioluminescence? It doesn't. Mark exclaimed, feeling the tension build up. Just look normal. Like either a really tall, slightly glowing lawn ornament. Or something. He looked up at the sky. This is a nightmare, just a horrible, beautiful nightmare. As if to underline Mark's anxiety, Mr. Johnson, his other neighbor, a retired police officer known for his keen observation skills, walked out to his porch. He adjusted his reading glasses and stared intently at Mark's backyard, his gaze lingering a little too long on the silver pod. Mark felt his blood run cold. Okay, Xylar, this is a code red situation, he whispered. We need to figure out a plan, and fast. He scanned his yard desperately, trying to find a solution to his alien concealment problem. Maybe if I put a top over the spaceship and tell them it's a new hot tub. Yeah, a hot tub. That makes sense, right? Xylar remained silent for a moment, their bioluminescent patches pulsating erratically. Your emotional response is escalating, they finally projected, their thoughts laced with a strange mixture of concern and curiosity. Why are you experiencing distress? Distress? Distress. I'm about to have my backyard exposed to the whole neighborhood as a freaking alien landing zone. That's why I am experiencing the distress. And then, I need to explain the fact that you're about to split in half. That's why I am experiencing distress. Mark exclaimed, his voice rising in pitch. Then, as if things couldn't get any worse, his phone buzzed with a message. It was a picture that had been taken from a distance, showing the silver pod in his backyard. Underneath was the caption, "Is this an UFO? #alien in Orlando #strange lights." It was starting to go viral. Mark stared at the picture, his face pale. This wasn't just a neighborhood problem anymore, it was about to become a public spectacle. He looked back at Xylar, their glow now brighter than ever, their form trembling slightly. Well, this is it. It was nice knowing you, and my prize-winning petunias, Mark muttered, feeling a strange mix of despair and exasperation. He felt Zylar's calming pheromones wash over him, and he took a deep breath trying to keep his composure. Okay, let's figure this out. We need to get you hidden, and fast. His brain was starting to come up with a plan, a very strange plan. Zylar was staring at him intently, and Mark felt a new sensation. Something akin to connection. They were in this together. This bizarre, hilarious, utterly insane situation that was now his life. He had an alien in his backyard, an alien that was about to split in two, and now, an alien that he was starting to feel protective of. This was certainly not in the How to Deal with Midlife Crises manual. The scent of lavender hung heavy in the air, thicker than the Florida humidity, and Mark felt himself swaying slightly, his limbs feeling strangely heavy. Zylar's pheromones, now at full strength, were having a decidedly noticeable effect. He looked at the glowing alien, their form almost shimmering, the shifting emerald and sapphire colors mesmerizing him. He was starting to think that the pheromones weren't just calming him, they were also turning his brain into a particularly horny pudding. Okay, pheromones, he mumbled, trying to focus his thoughts. Must resist urge to hug alien. He then shook his head, trying to clear the mental fog. He needed a plan, and he needed it now, before he ended up doing something incredibly stupid, like maybe declaring his undying love to the glowing, feet-eating alien in his backyard. Your biological responses are intensifying, Zylar's thoughts projected, their mental voice now laced with a hint of amusement. Do you require my assistance to mitigate the effects? Mark's cheeks flushed. Mitigate? No. No, I'm mitigating, just fine. He cleared his throat, feeling a strange mix of embarrassment and desire. I just need to think about hiding you from everyone. He then looked at the top. Okay, step 1, cover the spaceship. He grabbed the top that he used to cover his gardening equipment and threw it over the silver pod, feeling ridiculously inadequate, but also oddly determined. He knew that the top would be a laughable disguise, but it was all he had, and he needed to buy some time. He then looked at Zylar, trying to come up with a disguise for the glowing alien. And you just try to blend in, okay? He then looked around his yard, trying to find something for the alien to wear. He finally found a large, ridiculous-looking garden hat, the kind that wealthy old ladies wore at garden parties, and a large pair of his old sunglasses. He put the hat on top of Zylar's glowing head, and then put the sunglasses on. Zylar looked at him with a puzzled stare. This head covering is not providing adequate concealment, Zylar projected. And these optical devices are interfering with my sensory input. Mark sighed. Yeah, well, it's the best I could do on short notice. You kinda look like a very confused, very tall tourist, so maybe it will work. He looked at his yard. The top covered the spaceship, and Zylar looked less alien-y, but still not normal. He knew that it wouldn't take long before the neighbors would figure out something was going on. He also knew that he had to do something about the photo that was going viral. As if on cue, his phone buzzed again. It was a news alert. Strange light spotted in Orlando suburb. Local resident claims to see UFO. Mark stared at his phone, a mixture of dread and disbelief washing over him. The local news was now reporting on his backyard. He looked up. And sure enough, there was a local news van parked down the street. Oh, for the love of, this is not happening. Mark exclaimed, feeling a surge of panic. He grabbed Zylar's arm, his touch sending a jolt of electricity through him, which was probably because of the pheromones. We need to get inside. Now! He practically dragged Zylar into the house, the alien's height making the whole endeavor look absurd. He quickly shut the blinds and turned off the lights, the house feeling suddenly small and claustrophobic. He peered through a crack in the blinds. The news van was setting up a camera, and the reporter was doing a live report, gesturing towards his house. Okay, This is going from bad to worse, he mumbled, feeling a headache coming on. He looked at Xylar, who was now pacing nervously in the living room. Their bioluminescence was flickering erratically, the room filling with a strange, pulsing light. The increased attention is not optimal for my reproduction process. It is inducing stress, Xylar projected, their thoughts now frantic. Mark sighed, feeling a pang of guilt. He was not only dealing with a media frenzy, but he was also stressing out the alien, who was about to undergo a rather bizarre reproductive process in his living room. He rubbed his temples, trying to think of a solution, when his doorbell rang. He looked at Xylar with a look of despair. That's probably the news crew. Or maybe the government, wanting to take away the alien that I'm starting to feel attached to. He then took a deep breath. Okay, I'm going to buy us some time. He opened the door, trying to look as confused as possible. Standing on his porch was a woman with a microphone and a cameraman. Hello, sir. I'm with Channel 6 News. We are reporting on the strange events that are happening in this neighborhood. Can you tell us what's going on in your backyard? The reporter asked, her voice oozing with fake concern. Mark put on a confused face. Strange events? My backyard? Oh no, there's nothing strange going on here. Just a little gardening. I'm testing new garden equipment, you know. Very high-tech stuff. Very shiny and futuristic. The reporter gave him a skeptical look. Sir, there are reports of strange lights and UFO sightings. Can you confirm or deny? She looked around him, trying to get a glimpse of Xylar, or the top, or anything alien-like. UFOs? Oh, that must be my, garden shed. It's very modern. It has some special lights. I'm testing it out. You know, for gardening purposes, Mark explained, trying to sound as convincing as possible. The reporter looked at him with clear disbelief. Can we see your garden shed? She asked, her microphone pointed right at his face. Mark felt his heart sinking. Oh, it's very private. And it's very messy. You know, garden stuff. Soil, tools, and stuff. You wouldn't understand. We understand strange lights and UFOs, sir. Can we see? The reporter said, clearly not buying any of his excuses. He was about to say something when his doorbell rang again. He opened the door, and there were 3 people in suits and sunglasses. Sir, we are with the Department of Weather Observation. We need to have a chat with you about the unusual atmospheric anomalies, the lead agent said, his tone implying that he wasn't here for small talk. Mark felt a mix of anger and utter defeat. This was officially the worst day of his life. He was surrounded by news reporters and government agents, and he had a rapidly glowing alien about to split in half in his living room, and he had a feeling that it was all his fault. Then, his phone rang again. This time, it was an unknown number. He answered, putting the phone to his ear. Mark? Is that you? A familiar and slightly annoying voice asked. It was his former colleague, Jeff, the one that he had left in his old job in tech. We saw the news. About the UFO. We knew that your brainiac would be responsible for something like that, so we're here to help. And monetize it, obviously. Mark looked down, completely defeated. His old friends were here. And, judging by their tone, they were here to profit. He looked up. The reporter and the government officials were looking at him, waiting for his answer. He looked back into his living room, where Xylar was pacing. He took a deep breath, the scent of lavender suddenly feeling overwhelming. His mind was buzzing with stress and a strange feeling of affection. He knew that he had to protect Xylar, not just from the media and government, but from people like Jeff. He was starting to realize that he cared for the alien, even though it was mostly because of the pheromones. Okay, everyone, he said, his voice surprisingly calm. Let's just go inside, and we will talk about everything. He was about to reveal the truth, and, surprisingly, he was feeling strangely calm. The pheromones were definitely working their magic. Mark stepped back, allowing the news crew, the government agents, and his former colleagues, Jeff and Susan, to file into his living room. The place felt even smaller with so many people crammed into it, all their eyes wide with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Xylar stood in the center of the room, their bioluminescence now a pulsating, almost blinding light, the room smelling strongly of lavender, making everyone feel strangely lightheaded and a bit aroused. "All right, everyone, take a seat, or stand, whatever works for you," Mark said, his voice remarkably calm despite the chaos unfolding around him. He glanced at Xylar, who was trembling slightly, their large silver eyes reflecting a mix of fear and something else he couldn't quite identify. He then took a deep breath, trying to ground himself. So, he began, addressing the reporter, whose microphone was practically in his face. "I guess you all want to know about the UFOs and the strange lights in my backyard, right?" The reporter nodded eagerly, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. "Yes. Absolutely. What exactly is going on here, sir?" Mark sighed, feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and determination. "Okay, so the truth is, the UFO is not a UFO. It's an interstellar research vessel. And the strange lights, well, that's my houseguest," he said, gesturing towards Xylar, who was now glowing like a disco ball. A collective gasp filled the room. Jeff and Susan exchanged knowing glances, their faces practically glowing with the promise of profit. "I knew it,"